my interest, and some of you saw the day I announced on the 13th, Representative Norman was talking about this. He's been great to step up and support us. We so appreciate his leadership here and adding to a great team here in South Carolina. I appreciate any of you who come across the way from North Carolina. We're making a push there as well, but in the Carolinas, we appreciate that. But you may have heard that first week when I announced my candidacy, and I talked like I'm talking here. I didn't have a teleprompter, didn't have a podium, just talked to the American people. And I told a story about a guy by the name of Claire Condon. Mr. Condon lived a couple houses up the way from our family home. He served in both World War I and in World War II. And he was a great inspiration to my brother and I and a lot of other kids, not just for what he did in the war, but he came back and served at a concession stand every summer down at Legion Baseball. He was an assistant scoutmaster of my Boy Scout troop. He was one of the leaders in our church, and like so many of our veterans, he came back and continued to serve his community. And his post, many years ago, literally 30 years ago, sent me to a program called Boys State, which is where I got my first interest in public service, not just in government. And I had the honor to go to Washington, D.C. to Boys Nation. And one of the guys I mentioned was a guy who's been on staff for 30 years since then. He's a Vietnam veteran who's just from down the way in Georgia. He just finished his last year on the Boys Nation staff. But that really inspired, he and the other veterans inspired in me the importance of not just participating in government and politics, but the importance of public service. And so I owe a great tip of the hat to all those in the Legion who support Boys State and Girls State, the Legion and Auxiliary. So thanks to the folks here at this post and all that they represent. But I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be back in South Carolina. You know, first of all, I should have said right off the bat, I'm Scott Walker. I'm running for president. And I'd like to have your vote. I'm going to spend a couple minutes telling you a little bit about what I'm for and how we move this country forward. But first, I want to talk about another candidate running for president. And I'm not going to talk about the one the media wants me to talk about. Because I got to tell you, I'm sick and tired of the national media obsessing with one particular candidate. Because you know what? America is at a real crossroads. And instead of talking about the guy that was in the middle of the stage the other day, we need to talk about the real threat in this race, and that is the possibility that Hillary Clinton could be elected President of the United States. That would be worse than the president we have. We cannot let that happen. I mean, think about it for a minute. I hope most people saw the other night, over 20 million saw that I think any of the people, and I'm going to tell you in a minute why I think I'm the best to take her on, but any of the people on that stage where I was standing and any that stood on the stage earlier that night would be infinitely better than Hillary Clinton as the next President of the United States. Unbelievably so. In fact, I look at Hillary Clinton and think about this is the person who called those Planned Parenthood videos disturbing and then went on to stand with Planned Parenthood. I'm proud to tell you that even in a blue state more than 4 years ago, I defunded Planned Parenthood long before the videos because it was the right thing to do then. It's the right thing to do now. A month or two back, Hillary Clinton came after me and other governors who signed into law requirements for a photo ID to vote to make sure it's easy to vote but hard to cheat. Once again, she's showing how she's out of touch with not just Republicans, out of touch with the vast majority of a Main Street America who believes it's a reasonable thing to show a photo ID before you vote in any state in this country. Hillary Clinton is going to run on her record. I mean, as Secretary of State, think about that. Everywhere in the world that Hillary Clinton has touched is worse off today than it was before she and the president took office. And think about the after effect of State Department. Those emails. She looked us in the eye and said there wasn't classified information in there. And yet there was. I joked about this the other night, but I wish it wasn't a joke. It's likely that the Russian and Chinese government know more about Hillary Clinton's email server than do the members of the United States Congress, and that has put our national security at risk. We cannot trust her. She would be a good deceiver-in-chief, but she cannot be trusted to be the commander-in-chief going forward. so if we're going to win that election, we need to field the best candidate. Not just the candidate who's the best to defeat her, but the best to lead this country going forward. And I'll tell you a couple reasons why. I think, first off, why I'm the best to take her on. 3 simple reasons. One, if you're going to take on a name from the past, you need a name for the future. You need a new, fresh face. Taking a name from the past with another name from the past doesn't get you the advantage. Only a name from the future does that. Secondly, if we're going to take on somebody who embodies everything that is wrong with Washington, we need someone from outside of Washington. In our case, we took on the big government special interest from Washington who spent millions and millions of dollars trying to take us out, and we won in a blue state. If we could take them on in Wisconsin, we can take on Washington right in our nation's capital. And third, if you're going to take on someone who arguably hasn't accomplished anything, why not pick someone who's actually got something done? Because you see, that to me is a contrast not just with Hillary Clinton, but I'd like to think when you look at the great field, 17 remarkable Republicans running, really remarkable field, probably the best field we've had since 1980. People often ask me, what makes you different? What makes you different? Well, it's simple. There are fighters and there are winners. You saw them on the stage the other night. There are people fighting the good fight in our nation's capital, taking on the president. God bless them for doing it. They are fighters. But they haven't won those fights. They've yet to win those fights. And then there are winners. People who've gotten elected, sometimes with really big margins. And they make a really compelling case that they're winners. But they haven't been in the fight, at least over the last few years. I would argue what makes me different. I may not be the most bombastic. I may not be the most charismatic. But I'm the only one in this race who has fought and won 3 times in a blue state and actually got things done with results without compromising my principles. If that's what you want in a leader, then I'm your man. I'm your candidate. Because you see, I think that's what really matters. I think part of the frustration that some of those other candidates have picked up on is the fact that people look at, and even our Republican friends in Washington, and say, you got a House and you got a Senate just this last fall, but where's the repeal of Obamacare? Why is the Iran deal going forward? What happened to pulling back on Dodd-Frank? God bless them, but they need not just a Republican in the White House, they need Republican leadership in the White House who will not back down from their convictions. I have never backed down, even when they through protests and recalls and death threats. I will not back down for America. You need someone who will fight and win for America. You see, because going forward, there's a lot at stake here. Yes, there is. And I think it boils down to 3 simple areas. I'm going to tell you what I'm for. I'm for reform. I'm for taking power out of Washington and sending it back to the hardworking taxpayers in states all across America. That's real reform. I'm for growth. I'm for growing the economy by getting government out of the way and empowering people so that everyone can live their piece of the American dream. That's pro-growth. And I'm for safety. I'm for protecting your children and your grandchildren from radical Islamic terrorism and all the threats like that in the country. That is true safety. And let me give you a few examples of why that's so important. When you think about reform, you think about, I want to take big jumps. I was talking to some of the lawmakers here, Representative Norman and others, were having a good chat before with state and local officials. And I said, I want to take power out of Washington. Just like we took power out of the hands of the big government union bosses, and we sent it back to the hardworking taxpayers and the people they duly elect to run our schools and our cities and our towns and our villages. That's why our schools, despite what the protesters said in my state, are actually better today. Second best ACT scores in the country. Graduation rates are up. 3rd grade reading scores are up. Why? Because we put power back in the hands of the school board members. We put power back in the hands of the city council. I want to do that in Washington. I want to take power and money out of Washington in Medicaid and transportation, in environmental protection and education, and send it back to the states and back to the schools and back to the local governments where it's more effective, more efficient, and definitely more accountable. That is real reform, and we need to do it right away. Right away. And there's a lot at stake, because you look at Hillary Clinton, she tends to measure success in government by how many people are dependent on the government, by how many people are on food stamps and unemployment and Medicaid. I think the rest of us in America, we measure success by how many people are no longer dependent on the government. No longer dependent on the government. We understand that true freedom and prosperity do not come from the mighty hand of the government. They come from empowering people to live their own lives and control their own destiny in the dignity that is born of work. I think about work. I was earlier today, right after church this morning at First Baptist in Spartanburg. We stopped over at a little diner there, a nice-sized restaurant. I went in the back and I actually visited with the cooks and the crew, and I went back to the dishwashers. Because my first job was the job they had, washing dishes at the Countryside Restaurant. And then I moved up to the big times in high school. Started flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. That true story. I was in Delavan, small little town. My friend Paul Ryan, you might have heard of Paul before. Paul was in Janesville flipping burgers at McDonald's there. The only difference is Paul's manager, honest to God's truth. Paul's manager told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work at But I think about growing up in that small town. My dad was a preacher at First Baptist Church in Delavan, Wisconsin. My mom was a part-time secretary. My grandparents didn't have indoor plumbing. They were farmers. Farmers who didn't have indoor plumbing until my mom went off to junior high school. My dad's dad, my Grandpa Walker, was a machinist for 42 years at Barber Coleman. My brother and I often look back as our life as kids, and we realize we didn't inherit fame or fortune from our family. What we got was the belief that if you work hard and you play by the rules, you can do and be anything you want in America. That is the American dream, and that is worth fighting for even more today. Which leads to the second contrast, and that's about growth, because you see, Hillary Clinton thinks we grow the economy in Washington. Think about it. Last year, 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America. In America, you know where they were? In and around Washington, D.C. That's because they think you grow the economy in Washington. We understand, the rest of us in America, we understand that people create jobs, not the government. The best way to grow the economy is in cities and towns and villages all across this country by getting government out of the way once and for all. 5 simple things. Once and for all, repeal Obamacare and put patients and families back in charge of their health care. I'll send a bill to do it right away. This is like I joined the federal lawsuit my first day in office. I'll send a bill up to Congress to do it right away. Secondly, we need to rein in the out-of-control federal regulations that are like a wet blanket on the nation's economy. It's killing our small businesses, our manufacturers, our farmers. We need to rein that in. Third, we need an all-the-above energy policy that takes advantage of the abundance that God has given us here in America and on this continent. We are an energy-rich country. We can literally start refueling our nation's economy if only we embrace the abundance of our energy options here. Fourth, no, you left. That's your Fourth, we need to give people the education and skills that they need to succeed in careers that pay far more than the minimum wage. Let Hillary Clinton talk about how low wages are going to be. Let's talk about how we're going to lift everyone up with the skills they need for careers that pay far greater amounts than the minimum wage. I'm proud of what we did in my state. We not only reformed public education, we gave parents, we gave families more quality choices because I trust parents to make the right decision for their children. To me, it is an imperative, a moral and economic imperative that every child, regardless of background or zip code, every child in this country deserves access to a great education, being at a traditional public school, a charter school, a choice school, a religious school, a virtual school, or a homeschool environment. Every child deserves access to a great education. And I want high standards, but I want them set at the local level. No Common Core, no nationwide school board. the more reason why we need to take that money and power out of Washington and send it back to our states and our schools, where local people can actually make those decisions. Incredibly powerful. And then the last thing, when it comes to the economy and a pro-growth plan, is we need to reform the tax code and lower the burden on hardworking taxpayers. I'm proud to tell you, I cut taxes by $2 billion in my state. As tough as it was, we inherited a $3.6 billion budget deficit. We fixed that deficit, still cut taxes by $2 billion. Individual rates went down, got rid of a bracket, lowered taxes on job creators, lowered taxes on property owners. In fact, property taxes today in my state are lower than they were 4 years ago. How about that? How about that? So I think we can lower the burden for individuals and job creators in our country. And sometimes people, at least in my state capital, some of the liberals say, well, why is the governor obsessed with lowering the tax burden? I'll tell you a quick story. Some of you may have heard my wife, Tonette, and I like to shop at a place called Kohl's. I've learned over the years that if I'm going to go to Kohl's department stores to buy a shirt, I go to the rack where it says it was $29.99, and now it's $19.99. And then I go up and take that little insert, from the Sunday newspaper with the scratch off, right? And you take off, or if I've been home lately, I might actually go and get the flyer, the mailer that you get that gives you 15 or 20 or 30% off, right? I know who shops there. It's like a golden ticket, right? And then we go up to the cash register, and the clerk starts to add it all up, and then at the last moment, Tonette swoops into her purse, and she pulls out some Kohl's cash, right? And they add it all up. Next thing you know, they're paying me to buy the shirt. Well, it feels like it, right? So how does a company like Kohl's make money? They make it off of volume, right? You said they could sell the higher price and sell a few of those, or they can lower the price, broaden the base, and make more money off of value. That's how I think about your money, the taxpayers' money. You see, the government can charge the higher rates, or we can lower the rates, broaden the base, and increase the volume of people who participate in the economy. Years ago, that plan worked pretty well under a guy by the name of President Ronald Reagan. Back then, we called it the Laffer curve. Today, I call it the Kohl's curve, because I think you can spend your money far better than the federal government.